Alright, so far we've now seen how we can CSS in a number of different ways to add some basic styles to our page. We've seen that we can take an element and change its color. We've seen how we can take an element and change its alignment, move it from left aligned to right aligned to centered, for example. As it turns out, there are a lot of different CSS properties that we can add to our HTML elements in order to style them in various different ways. More than we'll have time to talk about in this lecture. But now, let's just take a look at a couple of the most popular, most common CSS properties that we can add in order to make our web pages look the way we want it to. And one of the most powerful tools for CSS is controlling the size of various different elements. By default, HTML just used a default size for everything on the page. But if I want to more precisely control how big any particular element is, I can use CSS in order to do so. So let me now create a new file that I will call a size.html. We'll start with the same HTML code and call the page size. And now, inside the body of my page, let me just have a vertical section of my page, just some section of my page that's going to have some content. And I'm going to put this inside of a div tag. Now, this is the first time that we've seen a div in HTML. You can think of a div as just a division of the page, some section of the page that's going to have some content inside of it. And we use divs because it makes it easy to reference a particular div, or nest information inside of other pieces of information. Or just to divide and break up our page into multiple different sections. Here, inside of the body, I'm just going to have a single div that is going to say something like hello world. And now, I'm going to add some style to this page in order to control the size of this div, to control the size of this section of my web page. I could use inline styling. I could factor things out into another file. But since I'm only dealing with one file for now, I'm just going to add a style section to the top of my web page, just so you can more clearly see how the style of this page is going to map onto the way that we're modifying these HTML elements. And I would like to style this div in a couple of ways. One thing I can do is give the div a background color. Let me change its background color to blue, for example. And then I can say, alright, I'd like to give this div a width and a height, some size information. I can say, go ahead and give this div a width of 100 pixels, and maybe a height of 400 pixels. So now, when I go ahead and open up size.html, this is what I see. I see in a 100 by 400 pixel wide vertical or rectangular section of my page, I see the words hello world. And so you might imagine if you have multiple different elements on your page, as your web pages start to get a little bit more complex. You probably want to have some more precise control over how wide or how tall any particular element is. And these width and height attributes can be very helpful, because I can very easily change the width to say like 500 pixels, for example. And now when I refresh the page, now I see that the width of this page, or this div, the section of the page, has actually now gotten a lot wider. And so we have the ability to control size using CSS. And now take a look at some other things that we can do. In addition to controlling the size, and let me change this color to something a little bit lighter, something like orange, such that now if I open up size, it looks like this. I'll make this a little bit smaller. Let's try 200 by 200 pixels. It looks now like this. You might imagine there are some other changes that I might like to make. Like this hello world, for example, is very close to the edge of this particular div. It's right up against the upper left corner of that div. I might want to change that by adding what we might call some padding to this particular HTML element, some space. Just so that the content of the element isn't so close to the border of the element itself. So, for example, one thing I can do is inside this div add some padding. Say maybe I want 20 pixels worth of padding on the inside of the element, such that now when I refresh the page, we see that we have some padding along the outside of the element. So that hello world now shows up not right up against the edge of the element, but inside a little bit as well. And if we have a particular HTML element that maybe is too close to the edge of the screen, maybe it's too close to the top of the screen, we can also add space around outside of the element by adding what we call margin to the element as well. So I can say let's give it 20 pixels of margin inside of this div. And then refresh. And now we see that whereas before this div was very close to the upper left edge of the screen, now we've moved it 20 pixels away from everything. So it's got some space on all four sides of it. So that's how we can now use margin and padding just to make the page look a little bit nicer to the user. So objects are not too close together or too far apart. Padding, again, is on the inside of the border of the element. I can add 20 pixels of padding, for example, to make sure that the content inside of the element, in this case, the words hello world, just have a little bit of space from the border. And that's padding on the inside of the element. Margin, meanwhile, is on the outside of the element. We add some margin along the outside of the border to space the element out from other elements that might be nearby it to make sure that there's enough space between the border of the element from the top of the screen and also from the left and also the bottom and the right, though there's no objects there that we're currently creating space from. So by combining width and height and margin and padding, we now have the ability, using CSS, to make sure that we're able to lay out our page the way we want to lay out the page. So that elements have the right amount of spacing from each other and are the correct size. In addition to just changing where particular elements are, like centering text or adding size and margin and padding, we can also use CSS to change how elements actually look. We've seen it to change the color of text, changing it from one color, like black, to another color, like blue. Modern web pages don't show everything in the exact same font. Usually, some designer is choosing what font they want for any particular web page. So, in the next video we will see how CSS is able to change something like the font that we use in order to display text. Thank you.